Hello and welcome to Neuroscience Unplugged, where today's guest, Inder Virdi, is sharing a deeply personal look at how he's learned to live with fatigue, brain fog, low mood, and some major health diagnoses. We'll focus on the practical side of resilience, what works, what doesn't, and how his understanding of being well has shifted over time. So let's get into it. Thank you for coming on today and sharing your journey with the listeners. It is going to provide them with practical solutions of how they can work through challenges felt unsupported through medical practitioners, support circles that they have the guidance of what they can do. You're going to be that best friend that's going to provide it for them. And you have an array of background all the way from science to nutritional therapy. So you have a very different array of perspectives to bring to this health and wellness journey. I wanted to start by asking about early signs and impact. So when things began to shift.
Yeah, absolutely. So my symptoms started at a pretty young age. I was around 19, 20, and I was working during my placement year at university. Like you do the sandwich year where you work in industry. So I was working in the city, working for a hotel company in sales. And I remember the first time I recognized that something wasn't quite right was when my boss had asked me to send some emails, and I thought I'd done them, but actually realized that I hadn't sent them. I thought I'd sent them, but I hadn't sent them. And I remember my boss basically having a go at me. And I remember thinking, this is so strange. I swear I sent them, which sounds a bit more like dementia, doesn't it? But it wasn't dementia. But that was the moment when I knew, like, God, there's something wrong here. And again, around the similar time, probably it was a couple of days before or after that event, I remember leaving my keys in the front door of my house. And at the time I was living with my grandparents for various reasons. And yeah, basically I remember my granddad having a huge go at me obviously for safety reasons. Yeah. And so for me, it was absolutely this kind of brain fog, if you like, what we call like a functional cognitive disorder. These symptoms were sort of the first sign that something wasn't right.
When you were experiencing these symptoms, would you say that you were very self-aware that these symptoms weren't normal for you?
I mean, I look back now, it seems like a long time ago, and I'm not sure how self-aware I was, but I definitely recognized that something was wrong and it was abnormal. And yeah, for me, my two biggest symptoms were brain fog and fatigue. It was just this all of a sudden struggling to spell things, struggling to keep up in a meeting, but then also just not being able to get out of bed in the morning like I used to be. I always used to wake up before my alarm, always. Ever since I was a kid, I was always the first up and last to go to bed. But it was just this feeling of, yeah, like I cannot get out of bed. And I explicitly remember a few times I would leave the house first thing in the morning to get to the train station to take the tube into the city. And I'd get to the car park and I'd basically just have to have a nap, like a 10-minute nap before I got out of the car to grab the train.
Now you're in a position where you can understand and identify symptoms because you've studied neuroscience, you've studied functional medicine to understand what these could be. And you candidly share how it's affected your home life, work life, like you said, just going on public transport, needing that 10-minute nap. Do you remember how long these symptoms went on for you to realize that something perhaps wasn't as it should be?
That's a really interesting question. I would probably say about a couple months because at the time as well, I was playing county level squash, so I was kind of pushing through the symptoms and just blaming it on the stress and not sleeping properly, and it'll be fine, it'll be fine. So I would say probably a good 2 or 3 months before I needed help. But then I essentially crashed to the point where I literally couldn't get out of bed for days, and that was the moment when I thought, God, I really need help.
That is incredible that you could identify where something wasn't working, because I've often spoken to individuals and they can sometimes go years suffering with these same symptoms. And it very much like you said, oh, it's just stress, or I haven't slept properly, or, it's that time of the month. There's just so many factors that we almost dismiss and we forget that we don't necessarily have to live like that.
Looking back now, I would say that I was absolutely more self-aware than many other kids of that age. I think largely also due to being an athlete and playing squash and gymming, I had quite a high level of body awareness. Looking back on it now, actually. So yeah, I think, and to be fair as well, I would class myself as probably more sensitive than the average person. I'm pretty sensitive anyway, which is good and bad because when something's going wrong in the body, your body tells you quickly and alerts you quickly. Versus people who are not so sensitive, who just push, 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 and then fall off the cliff. So I guess
Exactly.
it's a blessing as well. So yeah, I'd say my sensitivity in some respects did help me.
I feel like you're very attuned about what those signals are telling you. And often individuals can go years, sometimes their entire lives, without realizing what those signals are telling them. We leave it so late. We just let the symptoms go on and think, oh, I'll just take a painkiller for that headache. From such a young age, you carried this natural resilience. And I know you highlighted the fact that you're an athlete. From a performance perspective, you need to be paying attention to what your body's telling you. You need to be on optimal condition to be able to operate physically, mentally, and emotionally, right? When you're playing sports. Would you say there were any other factors from early childhood, athleticism aside, that perhaps helped you nurture this self-awareness and resilience?
Some weird way, and it's a bit of a paradox, but I went to a boarding school, and I wasn't I wasn't the happiest person at school. I didn't really fit in. I was probably one of only 3, 4, 5 other kind of non-English kids in the school of sort of 800. So I would actually weirdly say kind of I had a desire to try and fit in and go to the gym and build muscle and be more athletic than I really was. And I think in some weird way that process attuned me more to being in touch with my body. I did a lot of the things that teenagers do, protein powders and lifting weights. Yeah, so I would actually say in some weird way, it definitely attuned me to my body more.
That's really interesting what you've just spoken about. That almost this is the impression I got from what you said, to fit in, to be a part of your peers essentially. And striving for that feeling of being content, which, when you're with that age, it's quite normal, right? To be chasing a certain level of identity in some respects, because we don't always know who we are at that point. And then when you're surrounding with peers that are all at a certain level, you're like, well, if I can get to that point, I'm going to be happy, right? This is what breeds happiness essentially when we're in these clusters of educational institutes, as you just said. But what I wanted to touch upon is that you said that you knew symptoms you're experiencing currently weren't what you were experiencing before. So, let's get it checked out. Let's see what's happening. As a young Inder, how did you make sense of this all?
Well, that's a big question. Well, first and foremost, as you've highlighted, I knew it wasn't normal what I was experiencing. The symptoms that I was experiencing wasn't normal. It was very distant from the way I have felt in the past. And I've always been quite what is the word? Persistent, intense person. So if I have my goal on something, I would give my 110% towards that goal. So in this case, things weren't right. And I was going to do absolutely everything in my power to get it fixed. And that was just down to persistence, speaking to doctors who didn't really tell me much, and just through my own research. It was largely just my own research and my curiosity. At this point, I hadn't really done science beyond A level, but yeah, just through blogs and through online material, just educating myself, which in this was sort of 2012-ish, 2013. Today we read, everyone knows about meditation, everyone knows about nutrition, and there's just, every other podcast is about health these days. Back in 2013, it was still quite radical to have things like brain fog and chronic fatigue. It was far more alien. So yeah. And I'd say in some weird way as well, I love going against the grain a little bit. So I enjoyed kind of having something that was different, and it was kind of like, yeah, I kind of probably enjoyed learning new information and sort of getting dragged into a corner of something new and undiscovered and not in the mainstream. So I like that aspect of it too.
It's interesting because I was seeing two parallels for you. You were earlier describing how you wanted to fit in essentially when you're at boarding school. And then you've got this other Inder that suddenly understood, actually, I want to do something different. I want to go where my energy is taking me rather than what else is telling you. Because if you had stuck to what everyone else was telling you, especially the medical practitioners at the time, you might still be in that pit of trying to understand your symptoms and what's going on, right? You decided, I'm going to do what is right for me. I don't care what they're telling me. I'm going to find out what is happening because I know something isn't right. And very much like you said, those practices were not openly discussed back then. We've had a lot of scientific literature for quite a while now, but actually it being accepted in the modern world has taken its time. You're looking at all these different options and perhaps symptoms that are not widely recognized, but you said, no, I don't care. And a lot of the time, societal expectations make you follow what these practitioners tell you. And it's gospel, right? And we're blessed because we've got the internet. So you're on, this rabbit hole of trying to search your symptoms and finding out what's going on because you're not content with what the practitioners have told you. Back then, did you have access to a lot of literature, etc., to be able to do this research for yourself?
Not really, to be honest with you. Actually, well, no, no, that's not true. That's not true because I was still attending university, so I did have access to all of the libraries. And it's kind of weird the way life works because I was studying business management at the time, hospitality management, but we literally sat right next. Our department was literally right next to the building that taught the physiotherapists, the nurses, the midwives. So I had access to a medical library, like literally right next to me. So I would say in the large part it was blogs written by doctors and functional medicine type people, but I did definitely read textbooks as well.
So you had access to the internet that gave you access to, top-notch researchers who, when you're in the functional medicine sector, that's exactly what it is. It's functional, right? It's how it's going to be able to integrate into your life in a way that's going to be practical, right? We know what the science tells us, but how are we going to translate that into real life, which is what you've done your entire career? Would you say when you were younger of building resilience that there was any elements of perhaps your family carrying a certain amount of resilience? Were they often saying to you, Inda, find another way, find another solution? Or were they also saying, look, this is what the doctor said. Let's just go by what they say because they know what they're doing. And then you were left on your own devices, or were they quite supportive?
So I would say my dad is probably a typical sort of middle-aged man of that generation who was like, the doctor is gospel. Yeah, trust the doctor. If the doctor says you're fine, you're fine. My mum, on the other hand, and especially coming from an Asian background, very much more holistic, much more open-minded. India is obviously home to a lot of spiritual practices, but also, Ayurveda and just generally being open-minded. And I remember my mum taking me to see acupuncturist practitioners, homeopaths, and the odd psychic here and there. Not me, but I used to sometimes go with her. I was a bit young for that. Yeah, so I would definitely say my family has actually played a big role in how open-minded I was, but I only really kind of discovered that or appreciated that when I was much older. Because when you're a kid and you're brought up around something, it's just second nature to you, so you never really question it. But definitely, I compare myself to a lot of my friends who grew up in very classical, sort of English middle class backgrounds, and they are far more sort of obtuse than where I've come from.
I think that's really reflective when you said, I didn't appreciate when I was younger, because we don't appreciate what's natural to us, right? And it's only when we get older and you, for example, are now the practitioner to other clients. And as you said, you've seen other friends and how they've been brought up, that it does shape the way we see things. It shapes how we approach situations. And so in yours, you've used these different approaches to discover what perhaps these symptoms are or what perhaps is causing this. And I feel that that's helped you stay grounded as well. So you had your dad's perspective and mum who's more holistic and says, right, let's look at everything. So I feel like with both parenting skills has allowed you to stay very much grounded in science, but also explore other holistic practices, which, back in the day when we didn't have as much scientific literature to back up the results, you still knew that these worked regardless of what our science literature told us. So I feel like you have such a great marriage of both to say, okay, this is what the science is telling us. And perhaps we can attribute that to your father's perspective. But also you've got the holistic approach that says, okay, I know this has worked and it's worked for millennia. We don't necessarily need the literature to prove it. And you've also used those methods in your own healing journey going forward as well. And was there anything around your parents, perhaps challenges they may have faced earlier on in their lives or that you know of that may have shaped their resilience as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, undoubtedly. So my parents are second generation Punjabi Indians. My grandparents came here sort of in the 50s and 60s, um, had to make ends meet, worked in factories, care homes, etc. So there's no doubt about it that work ethic of working two jobs, working, what do they call it, like overtime, so like the 20-hour shifts sometimes, without a doubt trickled down into my mum and my dad, without a doubt. And my parents have incredible resilience, without a doubt, and incredible work ethic, and they don't give up, whether that's in their marriage or at work. they absolutely go for it. And they're just, generally very robust, strong people as a result of their upbringing. No doubt about it. Sadly, that didn't really rub off so much on me. I think a lot of parents compensate and give the children an easier time. I definitely had an easier time. So I don't think some of that resilience rubbed off on me.
Genuinely can't believe that you're saying this to me after everything you've been through health-wise. You're saying, oh no, I haven't picked up any of that resilience. I mean, damn, from a young age, you've had to contend with so many health challenges that people may not even touch upon once in their lifetime, right? And you're now sitting here not only of turning those symptoms around, but also helping other people through their journeys, because there will be other people who perhaps have gone through what you did and not have the support. And you didn't have that. So you had to, like you said, read blogs, read all the textbooks. People don't necessarily have that. You didn't have a support network that you could directly go to. You've now produced a career out of helping other people and making sure that they are never feeling what you felt, and feeling, now that these people come to you, they feel validated. And I feel like you're one of those practitioners that will always help them. And if you don't know the answers, you'll find those answers and you will dig deep and you will show them that it is possible to grow self-awareness around symptoms, but also find solutions. So we have different perspectives on you, Inder.
If I could just say something, I do go to therapy, and the therapist I see, I have tremendous respect for him. He's very unusual in that he's a medic, he's an oncologist by training, but does lots of different things, and he's very open-minded. He's into tantra and all sorts of stuff. And he just pretty much said exactly what you've said. So you both can't be wrong. So I appreciate that. So thank you.
The message will always come through to you until you actually understand it and trust it, right? We've got this incredible field and even more research on epigenetics. We talk a lot about ancestral trauma, but I think it's key to also focus on the ancestral resilience. Like you said, your family went through different challenges and how they nurtured their resilience, because we know resilience can be learned, right? And that's essentially what you've done. You've extended what they've been through, and you've had the chance to work on your health. Their resilience had to be built a different way. They perhaps didn't have the luxury to be paying attention to their health as much, because like you said, it was the core fundamentals of making sure there's food on the table, making sure there's a roof over your head, right? And we know that when you're in that flight or fight mode of just surviving, your brain is just going to do that to some extent, right? And then as generations go on, because they've laid the foundation to make it secure for us, we can then pay attention to other areas that perhaps they didn't have the chance to look at, right? But it is up to you to do that. And you did. You said, these symptoms are not right for me. My body is not right for me. What can I do about it, right? You could have just sat around. You could have just let those symptoms overtake mentally, physically, and emotionally. You said, no, I'm going to do something about it. And no matter what challenge you're faced with, you face it head on. You say, right, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to find a way through it? Rather than just accepting what people have told you. And you did this from a young age, right? Self-awareness keeps coming back to me with you. Like, you're incredibly self-aware. That metacognition that you carry. I've yet to meet an individual going through those health challenges from a young age, having to deal with it and be so optimized with it is the only word that I can see. I feel like you're just constantly striving for something better in your life, and also what's going to make it better for everyone around you as well. And I imagine the symptoms that impacted you day to day, that will have had an impact on people around you. Perhaps they're seeing you go through this pain, or you were struggling to remember meetings or what words were being said, and having to take regular naps, especially when you've had an athletic background. And these individuals who perhaps saw your health declining and didn't necessarily know how to help you or what to do. What would you say to somebody in a similar situation that perhaps is being faced with these health challenges and their support network around them don't necessarily know how to handle it? And when you've got your own health challenges to face, it can sometimes take enough energy to do that rather than making sure that everyone around you is staying composed. Would you have any practical advice to give people in this situation about how to focus on their health?
What I'm about to say is it's going to sound quite simple and flippant, but it is honestly the best piece of advice that I can give. And it is to just focus on yourself and not worry about what other people are thinking or saying or their opinions. Because I remember certainly having many people around me throwing opinions and even questioning whether I was experiencing these symptoms. You've got to be stubborn. You've got to be an absolute stubborn goat. And I was going to say I don't see myself as resilient. I see myself as just stubborn. I'm just a really stubborn git who just, when I have my when I have an idea or something, a vision, my brain just wraps around it and just does not let it go for dear life. So I would say you've got to be a little bit like that. You've got to, like imagine a crab claw. You've just got to hold on to your truth and know that these symptoms are real and you don't know what's going on, but you are moving forward every day, even though it doesn't feel like it. You are moving forward and moving closer to the people who can help you, and yeah, the things that can help you. So don't worry about the people around you. Focus on yourself. It's hard. You can spend a lot of time trying to convince the people around you that what's going on, and giving them consolation in some weird way. You can do that, but it's wasting your very precious energy. But the good news living in 2025 is there are plenty of resources and videos and things that people can watch to get educated. I remember there was one particular relative in my family who on a Monday wouldn't understand what I was talking about. Tuesday, Wednesday, I would show them articles and videos. Thursday, they'd be like, "Oh, I understand what you're saying. Oh, now I get it. If I'm here for you." And then back on Monday, back to square one. You don't have you. This is rubbish. You don't have what you're talking rubbish. You don't have. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. And then that cycle will just continue week in, week out. And that applies particularly to middle-aged men who just seem to have selective amnesia on certain things. So in all seriousness, you've got to just focus on your truth as much as you can. Know that what you're going through is real, because it's easy to convince yourself actually that it's not real, and it's just psychosomatic, and you're making it up or making it worse. It is real. Be stubborn. Know your truth, and just know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And every day, even though it doesn't feel like it, you are moving closer to the people, the person, the thing that will help you get better.
I've already named your resilience as stubborn resilience. And it sounds like you've had to build tolerance as well around people's judgments and thoughts. As you said, you spend that time and energy finding resources to show these people and educate them. And then, as you said, a week later, it'd fallen on deaf ears as if, that didn't exist and that didn't happen. Would you say that that has helped you in your personal and professional life to stand up for what you believe in and be more convicted about your truth?
If I'm being really, really honest with you, I feel a little bit worn down by having to tell, or let me phrase that. I feel worn down from years of having to teach and educate people about what I do. And so I've got to the point now where I just don't give a shit about what people think anymore. All that is important to me is just what I believe and, yeah, what I want and who I am. Those are really the only three things that matter. Easier said than done when you've got parents and grandparents and friends chipping in. But at the end of the day, I know it's a cliche, but all that really matters is you and who you are and what you want. That is what's important. And again, it's hard. It's hard in practice to apply that, but that is what is important.
And that rings true when we think about identity, values, for example, and reminding ourselves as to why, going back to who we are and revising that. Because it sounds like the journey you've been through, as you said, it wore you down, but it also made you reach a point and think, I don't care anymore. I don't need to justify or get you to validate what I'm feeling or how I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing, and this is how I'm going through it. And I can imagine that, especially if you're quite young and having to experience this, is a different kind of resilience, because not only are you having to contend with the symptoms you're feeling on a daily basis, which you have no idea what they're about, but also other people's expectations of you, and constantly having to remind them that it's not possible for me to do that. Well, why not? Because of my health. What's wrong with your health? You struggle to get out of bed. And a lot of people with depression often say to me, their family have not been supportive. They do some exercise, have some food, as if it's that easy, right? It sounds like people around you didn't necessarily empathize with what you're going through. They didn't take the time to understand, despite what you're going through, let's support you rather than making you battle and constantly feel like you've got to argue with them to explain what you're going through and to validate and justify. And a lot of people that I've read about and spoken to who have chronic pain had to go through a process of elimination rather than identification of symptoms. So it's not Parkinson's, it's not MS. Oh, okay, it might be fibromyalgia, it might be FND, etc. Which I can only imagine what that must be like for you to have to go through against people who have been in that field for years and researched and worked with people to turn around and say to you, okay, let's just work through it. It's not that I don't believe you, but we need to find a concrete diagnosis so we can manage the symptoms in order for you to function day to day, which is essentially the role of a practitioner, right? A medical practitioner, say, how can I make your life, your quality of life better? And if they themselves don't even know what they're dealing with, that can take a while. And with the current state of our NHS in the UK, what would you say to people who are perhaps going through that? The waiting list, we know diagnosis and, entrances to workshops and health services are quite limited these days. Is there anything apart from researching blogs, and scientific literature and speaking to practitioners, is there anything else that you would suggest for individuals to do? It could be like a daily practical exercise, even if it's a mindset exercise or a physical one, that perhaps can help them ground their emotions and feelings with what they're experiencing?
That's a huge question. There is one meditation, and I've been meaning to write about this or publish some content about this. There's one particular meditation that I have found that's very rarely talked about, because everyone talks about mindfulness meditation. But there's a particular type of meditative exercise called the pushing down mental exercise that I discovered when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, and it was devised by a guy called Dr. Lawrence Wilson, who is an MIT trained physician. And we're seeing a lot of sort of chronic fatigue patients, a lot of mental health patients. And this was back in sort of like the 70s. And anyway, he devised this system. But one aspect of this system or this program that he found really, really helped these types of patients, these chronic fatigue, chronic pain, chronic illnessy type, kind of obscure chronic illnesses, was this pushing down mental exercise. It's essentially, if you imagining pushing energy from the top of your head all the way down to your feet, when actually about 2 meters beneath your feet. And I did my thesis in meditation, looking at the effects of meditation and sensory reactivity. And kind of by accident, because I knew practically this exercise works really well, but I discovered by accident that actually there's a lot of research looking at this particular type of practice of channeling energy from the top of the head down to the bottom of the feet. And what it does is reduces activity. I mean, mindfulness meditation does it too, but this particular pushing down exercise does it in a far quicker and more effective way. So it reduces the activity of the emotional centers in the brain and allows the prefrontal cortex room to govern emotions and to use logic and rationalize those thoughts and feelings that are spiraling out of control in your mind. And it gives you that opportunity to step back. 10, 15, 20 minutes a day is all you need to do in the morning. And it can be tremendously powerful, tremendously powerful.
When you were describing it, I was visually doing it myself and I was comparing it to mindful meditation. It was very interesting because with mindful meditation, in terms of staying present within your mind, body, and soul, it almost is a bit more free flowing. It's saying, acknowledge, accept what you're feeling, and then move on to the next section. But with your pushing down method, it felt more like I was in control of what perhaps I wanted this meditation to do. Would you say that that's quite a fair comparison? I literally did it in like 60 seconds when you were telling me it wasn't, a great
Yeah,
session.
absolutely. And Dr. Wilson, who devised the meditation, he talks about how it strengthens the will. Absolutely, because you're reduced by sort of reducing the activity of the limbic system. You are paving way for the prefrontal cortex to come back and go like, this is what we need to do now. Actually, these emotions are not helpful. We have a problem here. We need to come up with a solution and direct you to the person who can fix that solution. So absolutely 100%, it strengthens the will. It provides clarity. Dare I say, for people with brain fog, it can be tremendously beneficial in focus, concentration, recall. I've seen that quite a lot, especially people who tend to be quite impulsive. I mean, a lot of people who probably listen to this podcast who have the kind of the CFS, the fibromyalgia, chronic pain, FND, those types of conditions, they tend to have ADHD-like symptoms as well that accompany, that can come and go, but they're there. And this meditation can work wonderfully because it reduces impulsivity massively. And I've seen that before. I've seen that and experienced it firsthand.
So you spoke about doing this meditation, that 20 minutes a day is enough to have a positive impact. What would you say to people who perhaps are new to meditation or even maybe unconvinced by meditation? What would you suggest for them to make this a long-term habit?
Well, this is one of the good things about the pushing down exercise, because when your average Joe thinks about meditation, they imagine lying cross-legged, fingers like this, and they think of being completely still in the mind and suppressing or having no thoughts and all this sort of stuff. And that in itself is difficult. That is a difficult practice, especially if you're restless, especially if you're agitated. It's not going to happen. But the cool thing about the pushing down exercises is dynamic, is that you're kind of, even if you've got a busy mind, you could still do it. Even if you do it half-heartedly and you're lying down, you can still push it. You can still imagine that energy being pushed down, but still be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner and what your wife said last night and blah, blah, blah. That's the cool thing about it. But in terms of instilling a meditation practice, firstly, I'm personally a believer because it parallels itself very much with implementing dietary change. It can't be done overnight, and it shouldn't. It's my personal belief that any type of significant change shouldn't be implemented overnight. So to implement a meditation practice, I've written a couple articles on this, but it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get into the rhythm of it. So what I would just very briefly outline is, one, set aside some time that you can do realistically. Just say 10 minutes for argument's sake, just a lot, 10 minutes somewhere in your calendar. That's realistic. For about 1 week, just go and sit in a place that you would like to meditate in or just relax in. It doesn't really matter. Preferably not in your bed, either sort of outside your bedroom. Or to be honest with you, I meditate just by my bed on the floor, but it's just not in the bed. So just, sit there for 10 minutes. You can be on your iPad, but preferably just chill out. You can just watch a movie, but just get into that rhythm of being somewhere at the same time every day for 10 minutes. That takes 1 or 2 weeks. Then you can move into listening to an exercise. You don't necessarily have to do it. You don't have to invest yourself fully in it, but you can just start playing that meditation exercise. And everyone's different. Some people like pushing downs. There's many different meditations out there, but I definitely recommend meditating with a recording, certainly in the beginning. And then what would I say? Anchors. That's the third thing, is using anchors. For example, you'll notice like this little bottle of essential oils. I sniff this just before I meditate every day, and I put the diffuser on. That just as a habit now, it anchors my brain. I just know the moment I smell that is the moment that I get down I sit down on the floor and cross my legs. And it doesn't matter if I don't meditate. It just anchors me straight to that routine. So you need to find some anchors. And Ali Abdul, the productivity expert, talks about making your habits more enjoyable, making tasks more enjoyable. So the way I like to make meditation more enjoyable for me is personally just sitting on the carpet. I use a diffuser to release the essential oils. I listen to a great meditation tape, and I just wrap a blanket around me because it's quite comforting. And those are sort of my anchors. Oh yeah, and I use some crystals as well, and I place those on my legs because I feel like they're doing something good, and then I'm good to go. Those are kind of my anchors. When those are there, that I'm more likely to meditate.
You're essentially saying set up an environment that feels good for you. You have the softness, you've got the smells, you've got the crystals. So there's a lot of sensory elements to your meditative state that just allow you to feel a bit more relaxed. And it sounds like you've created a space that you think of and connect with when you think of meditations. And it's almost like a ritual you're describing. This is the process to get my mind and soul ready for that meditation. And then you feel a bit more at ease at doing it. You talked about doing it in increments and making it palatable for you because everyone's so different in the time that they have as well. You spoke about, now that you've moved forward and you're, professionally in this field and you're more aware, do you ever have days where perhaps symptoms aren't so great?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. There are many days where I do drop, especially, unsurprisingly, it correlates with workload and stress. Absolutely. I can feel myself getting overloaded and feeling like the symptoms come back. Brain fog and fatigue are always the two that come back for me. But it's a little bit like a rev meter on a car. I can kind of feel myself going from 5,000 revs to 6,000 to 7,000. And when I start approaching into the red, I know I have to completely take my foot off the accelerator and spend 24 hours doing what works for me, which is normally lying in a chair with a blanket and watching some movies or something to completely bring me back down. So yeah, absolutely. And it's all about knowing yourself and knowing your limits.
What would you say to little Inder, who was perhaps going through these things at the time, about finding his way? Is there anything advice-wise you could give him that perhaps you may have done differently?
Do you mean when I was sort of diagnosed or experienced the symptoms, or do you mean just as a...
I would say when the symptoms were arising and before the diagnosis.
Yeah, my what I would have done differently or what I would have said to little Inder is stop. I would have said stop going to the gym, stop straining and stressing yourself. as silly as it sounds, I would have said go lie in bed for the next week and take your foot off the accelerator and more deeply love and accept yourself. I think Carl Jung used to say, what we resist persists. And I think we carry a lot of strain, um, and we spend a lot of time beating ourselves up about things we haven't done or couldn't do. And we weirdly attract things that just verify the feelings of not being able to do something, and we sign up for things that just exacerbate those feelings and recycle all those feelings of not being good enough. So I wish somebody had said to me or seen what I was going through and really said, actually, Inda, you're great as you are, and you're fantastic, and you're just slightly on the wrong road of beating yourself up, but there's absolutely no need for it. Love yourself, man. Accept yourself. I wish someone had also said that I wish someone had kind of recognized that the path I was going along in life wasn't really true to who I was. And I wish, someone had just said, Linda, you need to be more true to you. So step away from this path and get on the right path, because you'll be much more happy and positive and confident. So yeah, that's probably what I would say.
So, coupled with what you spoke about before, in terms of finding yourself and aligning your life path with what feels right for you, which, as a kid is so hard
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you're
exactly. Yeah.
constantly comparing. You don't even know who you are, let alone knowing what the right path for you is, right? And feeling into the instincts. And it sounds like you're very intuitive compared to other youngsters that I've come across. And, you faced multiple health challenges and you've now come to conclusion to say, you know what, I'm going to do what feels right for me, and I know what that is, I can go forward. Would you say that, given the society that we're living in right now, do you think it's quite easy for individuals to search and find out what's wrong with them? Or would you say that it's become a bit more harder?
Once again, what I'm about to say, it's going to sound a little bit flippant, but there's never been a better time um, to have a chronic illness or an exotic chronic illness, like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, the list goes on, long COVID. A lot of it was thanks to long COVID. I think long COVID sort of, how can I say, popularized is the wrong word, but certainly, you know what I mean, made it more recognized the idea of having chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and the chronic pain. Absolutely, I think really did shine a light on these conditions. So I would say it's a great time because there is just so much more awareness, so many more resources. I think AI is going to accelerate the learning curve as well, in modeling. So I would say absolutely that is one of the positive things to take away, that if you are struggling, especially with long COVID, there is a lot of resources out there. But I remember one thing when I was unwell, and this was, went back at the peak for sort of 2016. This is just before I'd met the practitioner who really helped me get better, get my life back. I remember thinking to myself, somewhere in the world right now is at least one person who has the answers to my questions and is able to help me. And I think that's true in life, and whatever endeavor you're doing in life, there's got to be at least one person out there. So I would say to you, the information is great, and very, very helpful, but you need outside help as much as possible. And there is at least one person in the world out there who can help you. But very, very annoyingly, they are often the hardest person to find, because often they don't have big fancy websites and you don't really know much. They're not very visible. But you have to put it out there into the world. There is someone out there right now, and I will find them. You could say a prayer or whatever you like to set the intention that there is someone out there who can help me, and I will find them. It's just a matter of time. I will find them.
We know how powerful language is, right? I know that some people almost felt a bit overwhelmed with just how much support there is because they often don't know where to start. What would you say to these people who want to live their best life and they want to fulfill everything that they want to do without going down the hustling route, as you said earlier, when they know their boundaries? What would you say to them to be able to live that kind of life?
I mean, it depends as well what you mean by living their best life. Is that because everyone wants different things? But I'm going to make the assumption that you just mean in general, just having an abundance of money and thriving life, having a safe house and etc. etc. Safe house, not a safe house, but a nice house. Hopefully, most of the listeners' houses are safe. It's difficult. It is a difficult question because there are so many forces at play, and my current opinion is that the stars have to align for you to get what you want. Really, the stars have to align, but it comes back to the same thing about what you want and what you really and why you want it as well. So if there's anything I'm learning, it's getting your priorities straight. Well, getting your priorities straight, but also knowing what you want and who you are and why you want those things. And actually, when you examine a lot, if I asked you right now to write down all the things you wanted, and we actually really dove deep into all the reasons behind them, a lot of those would fade away. And actually, you'd only really want a couple things, 2 or 3 things. And it's about finding your values. I think there's some research done, and basically people who tend to live closest to their deepest values tend to be the happiest and tend to also have financial abundance and emotional happiness and all those things. So by knowing who you are and what you want, you can then identify your values, and then find what activities, what jobs align with those values. I remember Tim Berg, Avicii, the DJ Avicii. There was a video or an interview that he did not long after he retired, and someone asked him, what's your secret to success, or what advice would you give? And his answer was really simple. It was find what you're really passionate about and find what you're really good at, and kind of like a Venn diagram, find the job that sits in the middle of it, and then you just work your absolute hardest and you will get there. And also, in my experience, at least all the people that I've seen around me who have done really explosively well, they all seem to just do what they really enjoy and what they're really good at. So just find what you really enjoy, but don't be naive either, and try and align it in a situation which corresponds to financial reward as well, and you'll.
So you've touched upon our thought processes and intent, and also how to action it as well. And you've put in examples of other people around you that have successfully managed to create a life that they want as well. And it sounds like it's inspired you to continue to do the same thing, because whenever I do speak to you, you're always giving such great nuggets of what other people around you, successful people, have created for themselves, and you're putting that into practice in your own life. So you're somebody who's very hands-on and can identify quite quickly if something works for you, or if it's going to, or if it's something you want to try. And it just, again, it feeds into the cycle of how resilient you are. No matter everything you've been through, we're going to call it your stubborn resilience. To this day, it sounds like you will use that to find a solution in anything you're dealing with, or to better yourself and to go forward with. Just so the listeners understand what it is that you do, would you mind just sharing what your business is about and how you help your clients as well?
Sure. So, I mean, in essence, and it's very simple. I'm a nutritional therapist, and I apply my background in neuroscience to helping people with brain issues in specifically. But yeah, so I'm a nutritional therapist, and my goal is to try and address the root cause of your condition using a combination of diet, lifestyle factors, and supplements, and some other interventions as well. Sometimes things like EMDR or evening and things like that. But in essence, that's what I do. And I kind of generally see three types of patients. The first are the chronic fatigue type patients. And these guys tend to be in their early 20s, sometimes up to their 30s, burnt out corporate professionals, or people who have had a hard upbringing, so experienced a lot of trauma, and they developed or manifested CFS and fibromyalgias and long COVIDs and all those types of symptoms. And the next bucket are the neuro patients, the brain patients. So MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, those are the ones I tend to see the most, and stroke actually more commonly now. I've seen a lot of stroke patients recently. And then the third bucket are the middle-aged grumpy granddads with heart disease, who don't want to do anything to change their diet. That's the group that I really enjoy, because there's a lot of psychology and coaching behind supporting and nudging them towards some lifestyle and dietary change. So yeah, those are the main sort of patients that I see.
I think that's your stubbornness kicking in with the latter group, in terms of, this is a challenge. I'm gonna switch your thinking, and I'm gonna make you create lifestyle changes, whether it's the last thing we do together. I could feel that in your voice, which is, you're the perfect candidate for that. They need that, right? You need to get through to them, because it's years of programming and thinking a certain way, just suddenly having to switch everything. And a lot of the time, when people I've spoken to have got heart conditions, they're almost like, well, I've lived my life. I've lived it the way that I want. What's the point? Why do I need to not enjoy the rest of my life? I don't need to do anything. And you're like,
Yeah.
why? So
And then
it sounds like, You're great for that.
100%. And I can promise you, having worked in the NHS and looked after well over 1,000 patients plus, I can promise you those men and women sometimes will be lying in hospital bed with their second heart attack, crying their eyes out, saying that they don't want to die and they're scared. So I see it all the time. And I always say to patients, or I always say to these kind of the middle-aged grumpy men patients, I'm not your practitioner today. I'm like your son. Just see me like your son. I'm here to give you some tough love, but it's also a time to put my arms around you. Not literally, of course, but emotionally.
You're being very modest, as always, about your achievements and accomplishments. And I'm also aware that you're an educator as well. And you also do workshops and keynote speeches and talks with organizations. And it sounds like you have such a holistic perspective to be able to apply what you know to different audiences, all with a common goal of helping them and to educate them about what are the facts, what is out there, what can you practically help them with, which is obviously something that you perhaps didn't have yourself when you were going through these things. And it's really admirable to see that you've created something now where you're holding space for people who perhaps are feeling quite lost and overwhelmed with their symptoms, as well as having to deal with day-to-day function, and saying, you know what, come to me. I'm here. Let's have a look. Let's help you through things. Let's help you create long-term changes rather than just saying, right, I know the diagnosis. This is what the recommendations are. I'll see you later. It sounds like you're really getting to the nitty gritty of their lifestyles and saying, what can we do that's going to be workable for you? Rather than one size fits all, which we know as a lot of practitioners do, unfortunately, practice with their clients. They'll have this theory, they'll have this model, they've been doing it for years. I'm going to stick with that rather than building something bespoke, which is what it sounds like that you do on the way. That's a testament to you, Inda, and the work that you're doing for your clients and patients and students at this point as well. Do you have any exciting projects that you want to share with the listeners?
Many, actually, many. They're all in my head, and yeah, I'm in that process right now of freaking out about all the things that I would like to do. But actually, there are two things that I'd probably like to mention. The first is a weight loss package. So I've partnered up with an amazing private GP called Suhal Hussain. If you follow us on LinkedIn, you'll see we're always posting stuff. Suhal kind of had the idea of teaming up with a nutritionist like myself who's passionate about helping those kind of middle-aged grumpy men. And because what he was finding was a lot of these patients were saying, doctor, give me the drugs, I'll pay whatever money, losing the weight and then just rebounding back because they weren't making those long-term sustainable changes.